Hi, this is Karen Longridge from the Children's Center at Thunder Bay. I'm a social worker here and I work specifically with children and educators in the early learning environment. I love what I do and I really am passionate about today's topic, which is trauma in the early years. So I'm recognizing that lots of times educators can't sit through a whole 2-hour presentation, but they want a little bit of information, and that's what today is about. This should be 20 to 30 minutes, give you a little bit of an understanding of how trauma might show up in your classroom for your little guys, or even older children in the before and after school programs, and to give you a couple ideas on how to support those kids. So I know that this might just scratch the surface and you may want some more information. Keep your eyes peeled and posted to the DSAB website, the child care portal, because that's where we'll be posting invitation and registration for our longer presentation. It's about 2 hours long. It goes into more strategies and ideas. We certainly share a lot more examples, and we also will talk a little bit more about some of the underlying stuff that you need to pay attention to. So if you find this interesting, I hope to see you in our 2-hour presentation as well. I'm going to get right to it here. So I'm just going to turn off my camera. It helps me, but I'll say hello and goodbye before we finish. Before we get too far into the presentation, I do want to recognize that today's topic can be triggering for others. Maybe it's because you'll recognize in some of the things I'll mention, the behavior that you're seeing in the classroom itself. Or maybe it's because it'll set a memory off for you or remind you of something that you've experienced in your own life. It's not unusual. Know that today's presentation is meant to be more a learning, intellectual kind of example, not so much an emotional one, because I'm not there to help support you through it. But if you do find yourself struggling with the material, feel free to reach out to us. We still have walk-in, talk-in counseling. It's just a matter of giving us a call, 343-5000. Just like you'd go see a doctor for a walk-in appointment, you certainly can come in and see a counselor for a walk-in appointment, and we would love to be able to support that for you. We also want to acknowledge, in the spirit of reconciliation, that we formally are in the Robinson Superior Treaty Territory of 1850. The land in which we work, live, and serve our children, youth, and families is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe. We also recognize and honor the contributions made to our community by the Métis people and the enduring presence of the Indigenous people on this land. Today, I'm really hoping to keep it pretty straightforward. What is trauma and what does it look like in the early learning environment? And then really, what can you do as an educator to support these children? Because oftentimes these are the little ones that can be really confusing. And what we would typically do to support kids may not seem to be working, and kind of wrap our heads around why that might be. So let's talk about the different kinds of trauma, because there is different types. It's not all one size fits all. Starting with acute trauma. So that's really those kind of one-time events that happen, and they happen kind of out of the blue. They're unpredictable, and with them comes a sense of not feeling safe. So for an example, a fire that has happened at a family home, certainly when 9/11 happened, that was an acute kind of trauma. It was a one-time kind of event. What's important to recognize about this kind of trauma, though, is usually there are caring and supportive caregivers or people around that child that help support their healing with that. It's not easy, these events. It might even be something as simple as losing a pet, or something, even sometimes it's a brand new sibling is being born. Things have changed. Things are not the same. But with lots of care and support and nurturing, a child does okay after some time after this kind of trauma. Another kind of trauma is chronic. So this is when those types of events happen over and over and over again. Certainly war-torn countries, children get exposed to many different events that make them feel unsafe. Again, there's still that kind of connection to an adult who's managing or trying to manage their emotions as well as the child's emotions, right? is, I have up here racism as well, because I do believe that when you are faced with a consistent message of you don't fit in or you are not good enough no matter what you do, that weighs hard on a person's well-being and their perception of how they fit into this world. Now, important to recognize again, this is happening from someone other than a caregiver. So there is still somebody who's able to meet, and keep a child safe in the context of all of those things. Now, what we might see from children who have experienced that acute or chronic kind of trauma, we might see some new behaviors, right? So there might be some more anxiety from the child. They may be more fearful. They may be clingy to us. They may not want to let us out of their sight. There certainly might be trouble sleeping. They might want to eat a lot more, a lot less. They may not feel like playing. They might just feel really withdrawn or sad. Lots of stomach aches, tummy aches, headaches. They just feel tired. They don't feel good. Sometimes kids who can verbalize will talk about, is that going to happen again? Will we be in a car accident again? Will there be a fire again? Anxiety might show up in, constant checks of fire alarms or smoke alarms, those sorts of things. And kids really do learn through play. I know you all know that, but kids also process trauma through play. And so you might see a few examples of that. It was not unusual after 9/11 to see children consistently, crashing their airplanes into buildings simply because they were trying to make sense of what they were seeing on this TV screen over and over and over again. But we also see it in other ways as well. So that will come up frequently. And the hard part is children, think that the sun rises and sets with them, as they should at this developmental stage, certainly younger than 6. And with that, they believe that they are in control of a lot more things that they are. So they have a sense that if I wouldn't have done this, or maybe I shouldn't have thought that, or things that as adults we know aren't, reasonable, doesn't fit for kids. And so they may tend to believe that it was their fault. This last kind of trauma is the one that's really concerning, and fortunately not as frequent as the others, but something that you will see likely in your career in childcare, and will require a special response to it, is called complex or developmental trauma. And what that means is there is this chronic, ongoing interpersonal trauma that happens by trusted caregivers. So the people who should be taking care of the child and protecting that child are unable to do so. And it may happen that there's multiple and varied kind of trauma. So it's not just one kind of abuse or neglect, it's kind of across the board. There's many things that are not going well to meet that child's needs. Often this can happen early, and we know it's especially harmful before the age of 3, and that's because children's brains are really growing and developing. Their foundation is all happening at those ages, and when you're really scared, it's hard to have the ability to do the learning parts that you need to do. And so we know that when children are exposed to complex or developmental trauma, it impacts their neurobiological development, how their brain grows, and their ability to integrate all the sensory things, so what they hear, what they see, what they smell, into emotions. Is this good? Is this bad? Do I like this? Do I not like this? And then cognitive information. Does this, make sense? Or how do I make sense of this? Into a whole. So those things kind of get fragmented. They kind of sit as little silos instead of getting blended together. And that leads to not just functional impairment, so functional being like, how are they behaving? So they're really struggling to manage their big emotions, or they can't really engage in play. And that's often because there's a structural component to it as well. We can't see it because it happens in the brains, but those connections aren't happening. And they need a lot of work to make those kind of connections happen. But here's what I really want you to think about trauma. No matter what kind of trauma it is, it's really important to recognize that behind it all is a sense that I don't feel safe. Now, when it comes to complex or developmental trauma, it's really important to think about the role of that caregiver, right? So of course, this woman is very angry. She is frightening to a child, meaning she's scary, right? So if you were to see that, you would feel afraid and not safe. But being frightened as a parent is also concerning, because what it says to a child is, I don't got you, adult, do not have this under control. And so if you don't have it under control, how am I supposed to have it under control? How am I supposed to keep this together? And so being frightened or frightening are both really concerning for children. And so is being absent. So when a child has a need and a parent can't respond to it, there's a checkout, there's a sense of, it doesn't matter what I do, it's not gonna make a difference. And you can see this little one here sitting in front of a TV screen. And believe it or not, that's actually quite common. Sometimes parents will put their infants in front of a screen, and of course the little ones are initially quite engaged with it because it's flashy and it's, you know, active and all those sorts of things. But what the child may learn over time is, when I have a need, you're not recognizing it or responding to it, and so why would I keep trying to do that? When we don't feel safe, it's like an alarm bell goes off in our body. You can imagine this even in your own self. There's that kind of sense that comes across us, and you know, we have a few things that happen. If, imagine right now, if, you know, a big smoke alarm went off in the room that you were sitting at, first you kind of pause and you go, oh, what's that? You hold still. And then you know that when you hear that, you may need to leave the building, right? You need to get out of there because something is saying this is not safe. I want you to think too, though, of this little bell as almost like a boxing bell, which kind of signals game on, it's time to fight. And lots of people can have that reaction too. Trauma is stress, and we all know that stress has an impact on our body. We hear that alarm, our bodies have a stress hormone that it releases, and it changes a whole bunch of different things in our body, our physical body. And we're not in control of this. So don't think because we have this response, that means we're faulting in any kind of way. These are just survival strategies that we need to have. And our body's been well adapted to that, except when it reads an environment as being unsafe when it really is, because it's had so many unsafe kind of experiences. This is why when we see a child stressed, we can also have a stress reaction. It's kind of like a mirror effect. You're stressed, I'm stressed, why are we stressed? And we have to work really hard to stay calm and collected and regulated in the face of somebody else who is not. So generally we have some responses. You've probably heard some of these, that fight response, right? So fight response in a child, of course, in childcare can look like hitting, spitting, kicking, biting, all of those sorts of things. I'm sure you might be familiar with some of those. That's a child who says, I'm not safe and I got to do something to get out of this. You'll also see the flight response, those children who are running away, they're hiding, they're you know, not actively participating. And the freeze response, which some kids will literally freeze, they won't move. But more often you're going to see kids say, no, I'm not gonna, you can't make me, or they'll ignore you because that's the strategy they've learned to keep them safe. If I pretend you're not here, then I don't have to do that. Few other ones, you know, several people are kind of playing with. One is the friend response, which is also called fawn, but what that means is, in this moment where I feel really unsafe, my best strategy is to align myself with the scariest person in the room, or who I perceive to be the scariest person in the room. And that is actually a pretty clever response. And so these children You know, when I'm a visitor in a classroom, they will come up to me and they'll tell me how pretty I am and how I'm the nicest person they've ever met. And it's really because I'm a stranger in their classroom. And sometimes people come, you know, if it's CAS or if it's a worker of some sort, can be really scary to a child. So their best thing is to kind of align themselves with them, and then hopefully that person won't get scary. Another thing we can kind of see is kids who flop or fatigue out. And that just means that their strategy is to really disengage. They may dissociate. They may not engage at all in any of the materials. In infants, we see that they'll fall asleep. Because that's a pretty good strategy. If they're entirely overwhelmed with the environment around them, they can fall asleep and just be able to check right out. So I want you to think of all of these things as survival skills, although they often show up as really challenging behavior. Of course, that running away and hiding, refusing to do something, even if it's preferred, even if I really like to go to snack, I'm going to say no, because that is, you know, at the moment, feeling like the safest thing to do is to just not engage. You might have heard this one before, you can't make me. Again, that's that freeze kind of response. I'm not going to, you can't make me. You might see some children hoarding toys, but not playing with them. So they go around and they collect things, and they're not engaged in that material in any shape or form. But if somebody comes along and tries to remove any of that or play with any of those toys, then you're often to see a fight response, right? Which can look like that hitting, screaming, those sorts of things. Sometimes, you know, it looks like there's a real intentionality behind some of this behavior. They'll go over to a particular child and push, hit, pinch, and then watch to see what will happen. Or they will look at you directly in the eyes and you'll say, oh, no, you can't do that. And then they'll turn and they'll do it exactly to do that. And sometimes that is them trying to figure out what's going to happen when I do this. So I've certainly recognized some children will go over to other children, get them upset, and then watch really closely how the adults are going to respond to that crying child. When people are upset in this room, is it a safe place to be? So they kind of set that up. And sometimes it's just a strategy to have the adult come closer. So they don't know how else to engage in a positive relationship because maybe all their interactions so far have been kind of negative. And so they may, you know, reach out and push or pull or do something to somebody else because at least it may not feel good, but at least there's an adult there, and that feels better than nothing at all. Sometimes kids will laugh after hurtful behavior. And, you know, while that's really concerning to see because we think it's really mean-spirited and, you know, some people will say antisocial, sociopath, those kind of things, it's not that so much as it is that it's a strategy to try to release some of the tension. And boy, we do this as adults all the time. When we're nervous, upset, or we're talking about something that's hard, sometimes we laugh it off. And kids have learned that sometimes if we laugh, then all of a sudden you'll laugh too and things will be okay. Good strategy is to ignore you, pretend you don't exist, and then I don't have to, you know, have this interaction with you. You know, sometimes it's very intentional. You know that child's not engaged, is ignoring you, and that's because those alarm bells are going on, right? That's a flight response. I talked about this as friend, only you're the best ever. And some of those children will have a survival strategy is if I can really align myself with this one educator, then I know I'll be okay. Excessive sleeping, unable to eat, and over or under eating. Some children will actually eat to the point of choking or vomiting. And that's, you know, probably has something to do with their experience around food security and when they're going to be fed. So those are things to kind of keep your eyes open for. Of course, triggers, right? And this is where sometimes it feels like that those behaviors don't always make sense. In the child, it often has something to do with something they see, they smell, they sound it, the sound of something, or even the taste of something. And it can be really hard to pick that out. You know, if something bad happened every time the family ate Kraft dinner, and well, I don't know if you serve Kraft dinner in childcare programs, but the example is still the same. If the next time that child eats that, they're going to expect bad things to happen. And all of a sudden, you've got a child who's up and throwing their Kraft dinner and running away to hunt at the table. And as educator, you're left scratching your head, going, "What? What's happening here? This doesn't make any sense." Oftentimes, those triggers can be developed pre-verbally. So that means the child doesn't have the language to explain what's happening to them. It's really a physical response, and that's that fight, flight, freeze. And you'll see that happen right away. But the truth is as adults, we have triggers too. And some of that's because we've been there before, right? So maybe it's, you know, another child doing behavior that's very similar to a child we used to educate before, and the outcome of that was really poor. Or maybe it's something we've experienced in our own life, or our own child has had that kind of behavior. The truth is that exposure to violence dysregulates us, right? Remember I talked about stress being kind of catchy, and we have to work really hard to stay regulated in the face of dysregulation. And some things will happen to us in those moments. So this concept of shark music, that's a circle security concept. And if you've taken it, you're familiar with it. If you haven't, you should learn about it, because this is something that happens that tells us something unsafe is happening, even though it's really not. It kind of, you know, triggers something in us. And so we respond in a typical way, which may be, you know, either going to mean or really hammering down and having lots of expectations. It may make us go kind of weak, which means, you know, we're walking on eggshells and we don't really follow through, or we might just check out and be gone altogether. Those are really big concepts, not ones I'm going to get into detail here, but I do want you to recognize that it's normal and to have a trigger, and we really need to pay attention to when those are happening so that we can come up with a plan to keep ourselves regulated. So in the face of all that dysregulation, all that trauma, all that stress, how do you keep a brain calm? Because that's what's happening. Is it's not so much that a child wants to get at you, it's really their brain is saying, I am not safe. Alarm bells, alarm bells, alarm bells. First things first, we have to regulate our own selves. And sometimes it's just as simple as making sure we can take a breath and that we are responding and not reacting to those anger, to the flight, to the fright. Okay. As much as possible, remove any unnecessary sensory stimulation. So both beforehand, because if the child has a lot of information to process, just even in their own environment, if the lights are really bright, if the music is really loud, if there's a lot of children, you know, screaming and running and doing all that, you're more likely to see a response or reaction. But certainly in that moment, if you know, a child is really starting to melt down, reduce as many of those stimulating factors as possible. If you can, pull a child to a quiet corner, make sure that there's no loud music, and think about, is there sensory things that are really bothering them? Is it a sock? Is it a shoe? Is it a whatever? But know that when kids are struggling, always try to meet their eyes before their ears. And that means survival wise, the eyes are on high alert, right? They are looking and scanning for any kind of cue that tells them what to do. They can't hear us to the same extent, or all our instructions, or you know, all the calming things we may be saying to them. So that's why the use of visuals can be incredibly helpful for when a child is dysregulated or about to be dysregulated, because you're going to have a shortcut right to their brain about what they need to do. You'll notice when kids are struggling, things get faster and they get louder. And so you need to do the opposite of that. You need to slow things down in your body, and not be as high and agitated, and use a very low, slow tone of voice. And as hard as it is, try to talk as little as possible. Because the truth is your words are not going to get in in the way that a child can benefit from them when they're that escalated. So if you do talk, what I want you to think about doing is just naming it to tame it. Name the emotion that the child's having in a way that tells them that you get it. You know it's a big deal and you're there to help them with it. So, hey, little Karen, you are really upset right now. I can see this is really important to you, and stop, right? No more talking about, consequences or what might happen if this continues to go on. They can't benefit from that conversation. They really need to calm themselves before we're able to have those kind of conversations. And as another strategy you could try in those moments, think about rhythmic activities and bilateral movements. So rhythmic activities, of course, are those rocking, drumming, swinging, singing, those kind of things. They are naturally regulating for children. So child's starting to fall apart. Can you walk around the room with them? I know you've got other kids in the room. How are you going to do that? Do you have a rocking chair where you can kind of scoop them up without saying a lot of things in a quiet corner and just sit and rock? Again, that process. Is it rolling a ball back and forth? Is it, just being able to swing on or rock on a floor rocker? Bilateral movement is when we use both sides of our body equally, and there's something really restorative about that in the brain, and any kind of activity you can do to help support that can be helpful for children too. But really think about going back to basics, that serve and respond, back and forth. So if a child is really dysregulated and you want to help them out of that, we're starting to see them calm down, we're going to engage some of those senses. Maybe it's, I'm, going to rub your hand really softly and warmly, and the child looks at us and does the same, and we kind of have this back and forth experience. Maybe we're talking about something we see or something we hear or something we smell. And that's really to say to the child, I see you and I'm here with you. I put these pictures of the eggs because sometimes people will say to me, Karen, this child came in and they talked about this horrible thing that happened on the weekend at their house, and I just didn't know what to say about it. So I didn't say anything at all because I didn't want to crack that egg open. Right? And I get it. You do not need to be a child's therapist in order to offer a helpful response, but you also don't need to be afraid of those conversations. I'm going to suggest to you that that child brought it up because they thought this was a safe place to talk about it, and they want to talk about it. They need to talk about it. So don't be afraid of cracking the egg, but make sure you got a bowl to put it into, and that means kind of containing it. You don't want a child to be talking about something that's scary around, that might scare other children or might be a little bit much for other children, but they still need to process it. So you may choose to say something like, wow, that was really scary for you, and why don't we talk about that over here, or maybe we should get you somebody to talk to about that. Maybe, I can talk to your mom or your grandma or your dad about that. Maintaining routine and expectations is really important, especially for kids who've had trauma. Often trauma happens out of the blue, without context, and their fear is always that something big is going to change. If they have a template to know what to expect, it's really reassuring and calming. So we're going to be flexible around that. We're going to be compassionate around that, but we're going to maintain routine and expectations because that's really restorative. Allow some materials to help process the trauma. So if there's been a fire in the house, you want to make sure that perhaps there's a fire truck available, maybe a costume of some sort. If the police had to come to the house, there's a police officer, all those sorts of things. But sometimes you need to be present when the children are having or experiencing that kind of play to offer an alternative ending when it's appropriate. So let's say, for example, mom and dad had a big fight, and one of the family pets was hurt. And now you're seeing this little one in your program replicating what they saw around this pet being hurt. And this is really hard for the other kids to watch. It's hard for you to watch because you're a pet lover. You might try to intervene a little bit and say, oh, poor puppy, that must have been so scary for you. Good thing I'm here now to keep you safe. And then you nurture that puppy and you rock the puppy and you do all those sorts of things to show that child that scary things can happen and people care about that and we can heal through that. And so you can offer those alternative endings. So show up, right? Be present, be kind, and be firm. So this is another theme that happens sometimes in childcare is we know what's happened. We feel really bad because this little one has had some hard things happen and we don't want them to see us as being mean, especially if they've experienced other caregivers as being mean. But what I'm going to say to you is that it's actually scary to small ones when we don't take charge of their big feelings and we let things kind of get out of control in the sense that we don't hold our expectations for them. That's just as scary for them as if we, reached that frightening stage ourselves. So have expectations for the children, help them accomplish them, believe that they're able to. And once we can say to somebody, oh no, Karen, we don't hit in this classroom because hitting hurts. This is a safe place. And we follow through every time, then, that's really restorative. I talked about this a little bit before. It's okay. You can say it sounds like it was scary for you in a way that lets the child know how hard that was for them. And whenever possible, try to learn those facts because it may help put their behavior into some context. You might be able to understand why, they hide under the table every time somebody new comes to the door. And finally, I want you to have hope. Sometimes it feels a little overwhelming, but I want you to know that you are not alone in this, and nobody should ever expect that all of the healing should happen in one environment. This idea of being an umbrella in the rain, I mean, we all have rain in our lives. We all have hard things happen. Your role as being an educator means we're going to hold that umbrella up so that when you come into our space, into our childcare center, it's a safe place. And we're going to prevent the rain from coming. But you can see this little picture that I picked. Is a little bit different than how we would typically use an umbrella. And I think that's because we have to really individualize each and every child's experience, and we can't do it alone. It takes more than one of us. We get creative, but we shouldn't be in this all by ourselves. The truth is oftentimes you are planting seeds. You may not get to develop that crop. So if your goal is a good goal to have is one that says, adults can respond to children's needs. If I have a problem as a child, I know there's adults out there that can help me. That's a huge life lesson to learn. And you hope that their experience of being in the center with you is just that, because that is something they can take on with them throughout their lives. I cannot emphasize this, the importance in the work that you do. And oftentimes, child protection organizations will have children come into childcare because they know that there's some structure and some predictability to their day and that they're going to be fed and have some, child development activities and things to help them overall. You do have a wonderful opportunity to offer a corrective experience. And the work that you do is so underappreciated that I want you to hear loud and clear from me. I really think the work you do is transformative, and I have the most appreciation for it. So now what? When you recognize that maybe in your head you're kind of thinking about all the kids you've known or do know who experience some of these things, talk to your supervisor about that, about what you're seeing. You may want to talk to the child's caregiver and say, I've noticed every Tuesday at 10, little Karen goes and hides underneath the table. Do you ever see that at home? Do you have any idea why he might be doing that or she might be doing that? And kind of get a sense for them of what's going on. Now, if the child's in care or if they're with a grandparent, an auntie, an uncle, or something like that, you might want a little bit more information around what's happening and what does that look like, again, to make sense of the child's response. reach out and know that our resource consultants are available for, maybe it's the use of visuals, maybe it is to talk about how do we best support the integration of this child into the program. And of course, my program, Preschool Assessment Consultation Program, which although it says preschool, it means anybody who's involved in childcare. You know, if we need to figure this out a little bit more, by all means, make that referral. And finally, keep learning. You know, I've said this at the beginning, I'll say it again, we're gonna do some more presentations, longer ones, and know that I'm always available for a consult. You wanna pick my brain? You're welcome to it. Just give us a shout. So that is really the presentation that I have created for you. I hope it was helpful. I hope there was a few pieces that you learned and maybe some new ideas you can take back into the classroom. And if you're interested, I'm really looking forward to seeing you at our longer presentation. I wish you all the best in the work that you do.